In 2012, 2-year-old Maddox Durkosh was visiting the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium with his mother when she lifted him onto a safety railing to get a better view of the African wild dogs. But the toddler soon lost his balance and fell 14 feet into the enclosure, which housed a pack of 11 dogs. Zookeepers and emergency responders rushed to intervene, but the animals quickly surrounded the child, and the attack lasted several minutes before zookeepers could drive them away. By the time rescuers had reached him, very little of Maddox had remained. Investigators later ruled the death a tragic accident, and the zoo temporarily closed the exhibit while reviewing safety procedures. In 1943, in Lyon, France, French resistance leader Raymond Aubrac was captured by the Gestapo and sentenced to death. But his wife Lucy organized a daring ambush to rescue him while he was being transported by Nazi officers. Resistance fighters attacked the convoy in broad daylight, killing several Gestapo agents and freeing Raymond along with other prisoners. The couple survived the war and remained married for more than 60 years, staying together until Lucy's death in 2007. Scientists created this eerie ghost heart by stripping a real heart of every living cell, washing away the blood, tissue, and DNA until only a translucent white protein scaffold remained. Researchers can now inject the empty structure with stem cells in hopes of growing a functioning replacement organ that the body may eventually recognize as its own. Horses have almost no muscle below their knees, meaning their lower legs rely heavily on movement to circulate blood. Because of this, their hooves essentially act as second hearts, helping pump blood back up the leg every time they walk. If a horse becomes unable to stand or move after a serious leg injury, blood flow can fail, causing tissue damage and breakdown that can slowly spread upward from the hoof. This is one reason why severe leg injuries is often fatal in horses. In 1979, 6-year-old Ethan Pates disappeared after convincing his parents to let him walk alone to his Manhattan school bus stop for the first time. He never made it onto the bus, and his case became one of the most infamous child disappearances in U.S. history after his photo became the first ever printed on milk cartons nationwide. Ethan's body was never found, but in 2017, former convenience store worker Pedro Hernandez was convicted of kidnapping and murdering him nearly 38 years later. Hernandez confessed to luring Ethan into a basement with the promise of a soda before strangling him. But his defense argued he suffered from severe mental illness and gave a false confession. He was ultimately sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. In 2015, 18-year-old Narendra Kumar from India was rushed to a hospital after suffering severe weight loss, stomach pain, and a swollen abdomen. Doctors were stunned to discover that he'd been living for years with a rare condition called fetus in fetu, where a malformed parasitic twin becomes trapped inside the body of its sibling during development in the womb. Surgeons removed a partially formed mass weighing over 5 pounds that reportedly contained hair, teeth, bones, and structures resembling limbs. The undeveloped twin had survived inside Narendra's abdomen for 18 years by drawing blood from his body before it was finally removed during surgery. In 2021, 11-year-old Lainey Perdue became the sole survivor of a small plane crash in Tennessee after her father reportedly wrapped her in a tight bear hug as the aircraft went down. The crash killed her father, grandmother, and another relative, but rescuers found Lainey alive in the wreckage with serious injuries, almost entirely concentrated on the side of her body opposite of where her father had been sitting. Family members later said investigators believed his body absorbed much of the impact during the crash, likely saving her life. Basketball YouTuber Tristan Jass discovered he had a tumor in his brain after suffering a seizure in 2019. The seizure occurred during a period of extreme sleep deprivation, but doctors later found an abnormal growth in his right temporal lobe that had likely been there for years. For 6 years, the tumor was monitored through annual MRI scans before doctors noticed concerning changes and decided it needed to be removed. After undergoing brain surgery in 2025, pathology results showed the growth was a low-grade glioma, a slow-growing form of brain cancer. Jass later revealed the surgery was successful, and doctors believed they had removed the entire tumor. In 2003, 20-year-old British skydiver Stephen Hilder died during a 3-person formation jump in England after both his main parachute and emergency reserve failed to open. Investigators discovered that the cords on both parachutes had been deliberately cut with expert precision. Despite the evidence of highly skilled tampering, investigators could never determine whether someone had murdered Hilder or whether he had sabotaged his own equipment before the jump. Mike Tyson later admitted that he took his famous cameo role in The Hangover while struggling with a severe cocaine addiction, saying he accepted the job mostly for drug money and was so intoxicated he barely remembered agreeing to it. The same year the film was released, Tyson's 4-year-old daughter Exodus tragically died after a treadmill power cord wrapped around her neck at the family's home in Phoenix. Tyson later recalled arriving at the hospital hungover and so overwhelmed with grief that his first instinct was to grab a gun and, quote, go crazy. He said seeing other parents quietly coping with their own dying children is what stopped him, and that Exodus's death ultimately became the turning point that led him to get sober. Tyson later said that had he not gotten clean, he likely would have died himself. In 1978, after North Korean commandos attempted to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee, Unit 684 was secretly created in South Korea to infiltrate the North and kill leader Kim Il-sung. The 31 recruits, many reportedly criminals or men promised money and pardons, were sent to a remote island where they endured years of brutal training involving extreme physical punishment, starvation, and harsh survival exercises that killed 7 members before the mission ever even began. When relations between the two Koreas unexpectedly improved and the assassination mission was suddenly abandoned, the remaining 24 men realized they had effectively become disposable secrets. In 1971, they mutinied, killed several of their guards, hijacked a bus towards Seoul, and exchanged gunfire with the military before most of the unit died in a final shootout and grenade explosion. The 4 surviving members were later captured, court-martialed, and executed. This photo was taken at the exact moment a phone began shutting down because of low battery. As the device lost power, the camera glitched mid-processing and partially corrupted the image, creating a distorted frame that looks more like a horror game render than a real photograph. This young snow leopard was caught reacting to the sound of a hidden camera trap deep in the mountains. The first image shows the rare predator calmly staring into the lens, but seconds later it appeared to snarl after hearing the camera click. Snow leopards are so elusive they're often called the ghosts of the mountains, and many researchers spend years studying them without ever seeing one in person. Lahaina Noon is a rare solar event where an entire city briefly loses its shadows, making the world look like a video game before everything renders. It happens twice a year in tropical regions like Hawaii, when the sun passes directly overhead at a perfect 90-degree angle, so buildings, objects, and people appear eerily flat as if reality itself hasn't fully rendered yet. Fishermen off the coast of Costa Rica caught something scientists had never documented before, an orange nurse shark. Researchers later confirmed the shark had an extremely rare pigmentation condition called xanthism, combined with traits of albinism, giving it its bright yellow-orange color. Nurse sharks normally rely on dark brown skin to camouflage against the sea floor, making this shark stand out so much that many people initially thought the photos were AI. In August of 2007, 20-year-old goth woman Sophie Lancaster was walking through Stubby Park in Bacup, England with her boyfriend Robert Maltby when a group of teenagers suddenly targeted the couple simply because of their appearance. The attackers brutally beat both of them before repeatedly stomping on Sophie's head as she lay defenseless on the ground, with one attacker later admitting they kicked her head like a football. Sophie fell into a coma and died from catastrophic brain injuries 13 days later, while Robert survived despite suffering severe injuries and memory loss from the attack. The case horrified Britain and became one of the country's most infamous hate crime murders, sparking nationwide debates about violence against alternative subcultures. Ryan Herbert, one of the main attackers, was convicted of Sophie's murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years, while another attacker, Brendan Harris, received a life sentence for manslaughter with a minimum term of 18 years after an appeal increased his punishment. This was the moment a routine shoplifting stop inside a Walmart in Canton, Ohio nearly turned deadly. In December of 2025, body cam footage shows 2 suspects, Shane Newman and Katarina Jeffrey, being held in a small back office for questioning when the situation abruptly escalated. As Canton police officers apparently let their guard down, Newman reached into his clothing, pulled out a handgun, and attempted to fire it at an officer from close range. Luckily, the weapon malfunctioned and failed to discharge, a failure investigators say likely prevented a fatal shooting inside the store. The officer immediately moved to restrain Newman as additional officers rushed in to secure the room. Both suspects were taken into custody without anyone being physically injured. Police later confirmed Newman was legally prohibited from possessing a firearm and was also found to be in possession of hard drugs at the time of the arrest. He was charged with attempted murder, felonious assault on a police officer, robbery, drug possession, and having a weapon while under disability. His girlfriend was simply charged with complicity to commit robbery. This heartbreaking photo shows Chinese kidnapping victim Yang Niuhua learning that both of her parents had died years earlier after spending decades searching for her following her abduction as a child. Yang was kidnapped at just 5 years old in Guizhou, China in the 1990s and trafficked far from her hometown, only discovering 26 years later that her devastated father had become an alcoholic and died just 2 years after she vanished, while her mother later died as a result of severe depression and grief, never knowing her daughter was still alive. Years later, Yu's relentless pursuit of justice helped track down her kidnapper Yu Huang, a trafficker linked to at least 17 abducted children, ultimately leading to Yu's conviction and death sentence. In Manila, there are long-standing reports of people living in the city's drainage tunnels, often called the Mole People. These communities are made up of homeless families, runaway kids, and people avoiding police or poverty on the surface. Outreach workers have found makeshift shelters built along the concrete wall, children with severe light sensitivity from spending so much time underground, and tunnels where the air is thick with sewage and rats. During heavy rains, flash floods run through the system without warning, and entire encampments have been washed out, with bodies sometimes recovered blocks away. This was the terrifying moment a driver realized he was about to be carjacked. He turns down a narrow street at night and is immediately met by a group of men waving weapons that look like machetes. But instead of backing out, he moves forward, only to realize the road has been deliberately blocked. 2 large tanker trucks are positioned on the street, and a fallen tree is laid out between them, leaving almost no way through. Within seconds, the men rush the car and start smashing the windows, trying to force their way inside. The driver panics but stays moving, squeezing the car through a tight gap along the side of the road, barely clearing the obstacles as the attackers were closing in. He manages to break past them and speed off before they can get the doors open. Incidents like this are a known tactic across parts of the world where organized roadside robberies happen frequently, with criminals blocking roads to trap drivers before surrounding the vehicle. It's not clear where this particular clip took place, but the setup matches methods that have been commonly reported across the globe. During the shooting of a Pepsi commercial in 1983, a pyrotechnic malfunction set Michael's hair on fire, leaving him with second and third degree burns to his scalp. He continued performing for a few seconds before realizing what was happening, and the injury led to lasting pain, baldness, and medical complications. But instead of suing Pepsi, he asked the company to fund the creation of a burn treatment center. Through the late 1880s and into the 1990s, at the peak of his career, Jackson donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charities, including children's hospitals, AIDS research, and disaster relief, even as his own life was becoming increasingly unstable behind the scenes. Around the same period, he founded the Heal the World Foundation, providing food, aid, and medical support to children in war zones in impoverished regions, including efforts connected to the Rwandan genocide. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, he quietly paid for medical treatments for children, including covering hospital bills and helping fund procedures for families who couldn't afford them. He also made unannounced visits to children's hospitals, sometimes in disguise, spending time with patients and giving gifts without media attention. Much of this focus on children was tied to his upbringing under his father Joe Jackson, which he described as harsh and restrictive, and he often centered his philanthropy around giving children experiences he never had. In 2009, while preparing for his This Is It comeback shows, there were plans for continued charitable efforts tied to his performances, but he tragically died before the concerts could take place. This was the moment when a hang gliding instructor realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. In November of 2018 in Switzerland, American tourist Chris Gursky had just taken off on a tandem hang gliding flight when he and the instructor immediately noticed that Gursky was not attached to the safety harness at all. The instructor immediately attempted an emergency stop, but strong winds instead lifted the glider higher into the air, sending them soaring hundreds of feet above the ground. With no safety line and no way to land immediately, Gursky was left dangling with nothing securing him to the aircraft. He was forced to cling to the metal frame with his hands while also desperately gripping the instructor to avoid falling. For more than 2 minutes, Gursky held on for dear life as his arms visibly shook and his grip weakened, fully aware that giving in to the pain would mean certain death. The entire ordeal was captured on video as the instructor desperately fought the wind and steered toward an emergency landing. When they finally reached the ground, Gursky collapsed in pain and was later diagnosed with a fractured wrist and torn bicep from hanging on so tightly. Authorities ruled the accident a serious safety failure, fining the instructor and suspending his license, while the footage became a chilling reminder of how one small misstep turned a fun recreational flight into a life-threatening nightmare. Here's a friendly reminder of why you should always lock your doors no matter what. This disturbing Ring camera footage shows a disheveled woman wearing a white dress wandering through a residential stairway in the middle of the night while holding a knife in her mouth. She paces back and forth, systematically trying apartment doors, stopping at each one to see if it's unlocked. When she realizes they're locked, she bends down and checks under the doormats, clearly searching for hidden spare keys before moving on to the next door. She even stares directly into the camera while moving from door to door, seemingly unaware or unconcerned by how terrifying she looks. Still armed, she walks up the stairs to another floor and continues scanning hallways, before reportedly lingering outside more apartments as the video cuts off. Her appearance, combined with the fact that she was half-dressed and carrying a knife in her mouth, made many people fear that she wasn't simply trespassing, but was potentially on drugs or mentally ill while actively looking for someone to hurt, showing how close a single unlocked door can come to turning into something far worse. This was the moment a man attempted to rob a small loans office in Kazakhstan, smashing through thin laminated safety glass at the receptionist's window. He then quickly climbed inside, grabbed the female clerk, and threatened her with a knife to force her cooperation. He stole about $340 before fleeing, but police arrested him later that same day. Authorities confirmed he was eventually prosecuted and ultimately sentenced to 7 years in prison for the robbery, while the clerk managed to escape unharmed. This person looked over the balcony of their high-rise apartment building to realize they owned a cat, not a pussy. Here's a clip of a man trapped inside a grain silo with thousands of pounds of grain pressing in from every direction. What makes this situation so horrifying is that grain doesn't behave like a solid. Once it starts moving, it flows like liquid, pulling a person under like quicksand. Within seconds, someone can be buried up to their chest, and struggling only makes it worse. By this point, self-rescue is nearly impossible. The pressure restricts breathing, and panic speeds up suffocation. The only real chance of survival is to stop moving and hold a small pocket of air around your face, keeping your head above the grain until rescuers arrive. Accordingly, dozens of farmers die every year in this exact way due to grain entrapment. Acclaimed filmmaker and actor Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner have been found dead in their Brentwood, Los Angeles home in what investigators are investigating as an apparent homicide. Emergency responders discovered the couple inside the residence during a medical aid call when their daughter Romy reportedly found them dead with their throats slit. Their 32-year-old son Nick Reiner was taken into custody and held on $4 million bail in connection with the deaths, though police have not publicly released a confirmed motive. Nick has a well-documented history of long-term drug addiction and periods of homelessness, first entering rehab around age 15 and struggling for years before finally getting clean. He later worked with his father on the 2015 film Being Charlie, which drew on his experiences with addiction and recovery. Rob Reiner was one of Hollywood's most recognizable directors and actors, known for films such as Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men. His death alongside his wife's has sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry as authorities continue their investigation. Noah Schnapp has opened up about the psychological toll of playing Will Byers, a character subjected to prolonged fear, possession, and isolation starting when Schnapp was just 11 years old. He said that repeatedly filming scenes of terror and helplessness made it difficult to separate himself emotionally from the character, particularly during the earlier seasons when he was still developing emotionally. He later acknowledged that much of his early work required him to access fear and distress far beyond what most children experience at that age. But let's be honest, the real morbid fact here is that bowl cut. My God, they did him dirty. Caleb McLaughlin and Pryor Ferguson have both stated that becoming famous as children on Stranger Things exposed them to racist harassment from fans. They've said some of the harassment even escalated to messages threatening violence, including death threats, even when they were still just children. Maya Hawke has said her childhood unfolded under the shadow of a very public family collapse after her father Ethan Hawke had an affair with the family nanny, an event she's described as shattering her sense of stability. She grew up amid the fallout of that breakup, which she's linked to long-term anxiety and feelings of abandonment. As a child, Maya also struggled with severe dyslexia, falling so behind academically that she was eventually pulled out of school because she couldn't read at the expected level, leaving her isolated during years when structure and security were already unraveling. Eminem was stalked by the same man who broke into his properties 3 times over 6 years, repeatedly reaching him despite arrests and court orders. In 2019, the stalker broke into one of Eminem's former homes and told the new homeowner he was looking for his brother Marshall. In 2020, he escalated by entering Eminem's actual residence through an unlocked entry point while Eminem was asleep, later telling police he was there to kill him. After being arrested and convicted, the man returned again in 2024, once more breaching Eminem's property. Court records show the break-ins weren't the result of sophisticated planning, but repeated exploitation of access points and timing, highlighting how even high-level security measures can fail against persistent obsession. Eminem was unharmed, but prosecutors described the pattern as escalating and dangerous. A mummified carrier pigeon found inside a UK chimney in 1982 was carrying an encrypted World War II message from 1944 that's never been decoded. The pigeon likely died mid-mission during Britain's wartime communications and remained sealed in the chimney for nearly 40 years. Attached to its leg was a capsule holding a coded strip of letters and numbers believed to be connected to D-Day operations. Despite repeated attempts by historians and codebreakers, the message's meaning and destination remain unknown. Britain's intelligence agency GCHQ has confirmed the cipher is still unsolved and publicly asked for help deciphering it, leaving whatever information the pigeon was carrying permanently undelivered.